everyone, thanks for joining me on the channel. And today I'm going to show you how you can take some scrap wood in your shop, something like this piece of pine, and turn it into some coaster blanks that you could use to custom engrave and sell at your shop, craft shows, or sell for events like Father's Day or anything like that. I'll show you a couple of methods like engraving as well as using a stencil that to get a design put onto this material, and it really depends on the type of wood that you're using, and I'll show you the results of using the two different methods. Alright, so I've got some scrap wood here. I've just got some pieces that I was using to make a tabletop, and so they're just some 3/4 inch thick pieces, and they happen to be actually 4 inches wide. So that's going to work out really well for my coasters because I want a 4 inch by 4 inch coaster. So all I need to do is take these and put them on the table saw, and I'm just going to cut them down into blocks that are roughly 4 inches by 4 inches. They don't have to be perfect, but just that's a good size for a coaster, and just somewhere really close to those dimensions. And you can see this piece right here is definitely a scrap piece, and I'm not really going to be able to use this portion of it, but I might get 2 coasters out of this section right here. So we'll use that one, and then this one's a pretty good clean piece, so I'll get several coasters out of it, and then this one here will avoid some of these knots and defects in the piece. So it's a good use of this piece of wood, which I wouldn't use on a tabletop or something else. So let's go over to the table saw and get set up to start cutting these out. Alright, so here's the setup that we've got going on. I've got my piece of wood that we're going to be cutting up into the coasters. It's already 4 inches in this dimension, so I'm wanting to cut 4 inches in this dimension. And with just a standard job site table saw, this is just a Skil table saw. It's pretty cheap, probably one of the best entry-level table saws that you can get. I'm going to use the cheapo miter gauge that came with it. You can use that to help you get a good square cut. One of the biggest complaints about these is the play that it has inside of the miter slots. It just is sloppy and it can move around. A good cheap fix for that is to just put a little bit of tape on the rails. Obviously that's not going to be super precision, but I mean it works for me, especially for doing something like this, like doing coasters. You just want to get pretty close to square. It's good enough. And what we're doing is we're using a stop block on the fence. You don't ever want to have the fence exactly the width and use a miter gauge or a cross-cut sled, because what will happen is it can get bound up with the blade and do kickback. So that, to make this a little bit safer, we're using stop block, and it is behind the edge of the blade. So what will happen is whenever I have it good and square and I'm feeding that through, as it cuts, it is going to leave the stop block and it's going to fall. There's going to be plenty of room in between the blade and the fence for it not to get bound up and kick back. So we're going to go ahead and square up this edge and then cut as many coasters as we can get out of each of these pieces. And I'll also have me a push stick so that way I can take and clear the coasters as they are cut off, and so that way it's they can safely be pushed out onto the outfeed table that I've got set up behind my table saw. So I've got all of this set up and we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and cut these out. Now our next task is to smooth out the edges of these, and I'm going to do that with this oscillating belt sander, tabletop sander, and I'm going to go around each of these edges, and I'm actually going to round over the corners as well. let's get these sides taken care of. Our next task is to take the tabletop router, and we're going to take and round over the edges. I've got a piece of scrap that I was using off the end that had some defects, and I'm going to use this to set the height of my router, and I'm going to use this 1/8 inch round over bit to round over the corners. Now you could do this with a sander, but with so many coasters and so much of an edge, it's going to be a lot faster with the router. All right, now we've got all the edges rounded off with the router. It's not super smooth, so we're going to take and sand all this down with some finer grit sandpaper. I don't think I mentioned it before, but on the tabletop oscillating sander, I was using somewhere around 80 grit, and so I'm going to step that down to like 120 grit on my palm sander, and that's going to get us a lot smoother finish. So the important thing that we're doing right here is trying to get this little bit of a burr. We'll get it to focus, the camera to focus, okay. Try to get like these little edges, these little burrs that will come up when you use a round over bit on a router. You can get like that little edge. It doesn't take much to sand that off with your palm sander, so that's what we're doing here. So the engraving normally works out really well on wood, and it did for the most part in this case. So this is the engraving that we did in this pine, but the issue that I have with it is the grain of the wood, or these growth rings in the wood, did not engrave the same as these areas in between. So you can see I have like deeper cut here and then more of a shallow cut, and these bands are very visible through it. So I didn't really like this, so I came up with another method, and that would be to use a stencil. So we'll take a look at how the stencil works, how you can paint the design onto it. I think if you had a different material like red oak, so like here's a piece of red oak, just the grain is a lot tighter. I think I know this engraves better, so I've had a lot of luck with that. Also maple, it just was a lot more consistent outcome with engraving on it. So if I made some coasters in the future out of maple or red oak, I think I'd get a better outcome. But for these coasters made out of this pine, I think our stencil might be a good solution for this. So to paint the design onto the coaster instead of engraving it, we're going to use this cardstock and create a stencil. And I went ahead and did a test grid on it, and you can see here these two lower squares are the ones that cut out properly. And so settings are 20% power and at 10 millimeters per second. So let's get this on the laser, and we're going to go ahead and cut this out so you can see how that works. Alright, so the job is finished processing, and you can see we're cut out of the cardstock, and pretty clean cut, so that just dropped right out of there. I'll lay the cardstock to the side and just pick up on it, and so here we go. So Might just have to pull it loose, but so there's the stencil, and you can see it's all the parts that we would want to engrave, but in this case we're going to be using the airbrush to spray it on and paint it whatever color we want to paint. So now we've got a blank coaster, and what we will do is take our stencil and we want to line it up onto the coaster, and this is how we would paint this area in. Problem is that this would move around and mess up the stencil, so we want to lock it into place. So the thing that I came up with is to use some of this spray adhesive. So I just took and flipped over the stencil and sprayed the back of this, and then it just real lightly, not a heavy coating of it, but I just lightly sprayed this on just to make it tacky, and then I stuck it down onto this, and that locked it in, especially these little fine areas like this. And then I was able to spray it and coat it, and that worked really well. I got 2 uses out of this before the stencil started like raising up the edges and it not, you know, adhering well to the wood. So I didn't get to record spraying it, but this is the coaster after using that stencil. So I think it turned out pretty well. Just pretty good lines and everything. The only issue with this process is that there can't be any inner details. Nothing can be an island. It all has to be connected, otherwise that'll fall out whenever you cut out the details. So if you keep that when you're designing whatever it is that you're going to engrave, if you keep that in mind, then you can avoid it. But I just want to point that out. But it turned out really well. I'm excited. I think that's a good process, a good thing for these coasters that give it a good good finished look. And all we would need to do is put some polyurethane on this to protect it, and then I think it'd be ready to go. Hope you've enjoyed watching this project. Really excited with the results. The coasters turned out really well. I really like them being stained like this, and the pine. It's a cheap wood, but it's definitely something that you can market and sell with your laser, and you can turn something that's very low value into high value with your laser. So hope this helps out and gives you an idea of how you can take some scrap wood and turn it into something that can make you some money. So thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos on using your xTool laser. Thanks.